All right. Hello, Andrew.
Jothy, it's great to see you.
Great to see you. I always like to uh, let people know where the folks are located. So, where are you sitting right now?
I am calling in from Portland, Oregon,
All
and I'm
right.
just
And
home office here.
yep. And I am, as always, I'm in Wayland, suburb of Boston. Okay. Um, and your shirt's gorgeous. Let me just say that.
Thanks. I've been
And
told it really matches my eyes.
and you've told me that you probably have like 100 of these shirts in your closet.
Maybe not 100, but quite a few. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's my sort of my dream is to escape to the islands and maybe even work from there someday.
Why not? It would be great. Um, all right. So you are um, you are definitely a startup guy because you've been at 6 startups.
Yeah.
So if could you just list in order what they were and kind of how they turned out?
So the interesting thing, I hadn't even thought of it until this interview came up, and then you started asking these questions. But so I grew up in Silicon Valley, and my original like after school job as a kid was at a startup. So I used to jump on my bike after junior high and ride over to the startup and work on code. So that's sort of how early it starts for me. Um, so that was the first one. I don't even remember the name of the company at this point. The sort of then I took some time off and I went to school and all this stuff. But sort of when I circled back to startups, I did a startup which was a very small startup, which was Pacific Micro Instruments. They were making handheld instrumentation. You may recall back in the day there was the Palm and the handspring visor, and so that was the
Mm-hmm.
platform targeting. So I got interested in I was doing DSP processing. Um, from there, I actually switched to a. Oh, and did you want me to go over outcomes? So that was 2001, September 11th. Um, that was an unfortunate global event that kind of took out that startup. Um, from there, I actually went to a chip. This is sort of my first chip company. So there was a company, Xyron, that was doing a novel processor architecture. It was a parallel. It's kind of like a variant of what is now hyper-threading sort of thing. And I ended up there doing hardware verification. So I was working on the chip verification team. From there, that's actually then the introduction, how I met you. We both worked at Ambric, um, and you know that story. Uh, and I think you know actually a lot of the rest of my career because we've sort of had this intertwining parallel tracks over the years.
Right, but we should mention since you're before you leave Ambric, we might
Yep.
come back to it. But the outcome there was not good from another big event, which was basically the 2008 2009. What do they call it? The Great Recession or something.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and so we were there together, and it seemed to be going okay. They, in fact, went back to their investors and said, we need more money. We got sales happening. And before then and since then, I've never seen this happen where they make a cash call. The limited partners who, by contract, have already committed to this money when it's called for, said, no, we're not doing it.
We don't
That
have
was
it.
it.
Yeah.
Game over.
Yep. Yep. That was really unfortunate because that was at a point where they were really starting to get traction.
Yeah.
Yep. So from there, actually, then I went to some bigger companies and sort of left the startup game for a bit. So BAE Systems and then Draper Laboratory, and then we spun out into Dover Microsystems.
Wasn't there a Boeing time?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Actually, I forgot that one. That's actually an interesting story because that was a post-acquisition startup. So, and I'd been aware of that company. I'd actually been to visit them when they were like four guys in a garage. Um, they're out in Hood River here, just about an hour east of Portland here. And they were sort of one of the original drone companies selling surveillance drones to the military. Um, and so that for me was an experience of sort of the post acquisition side of a startup where startup grew. Uh, they had contracts with Boeing. They had very large contracts with the military. They were very successful. And that was a very successful exit for the founder, basically selling to Boeing. Boeing was a strategic investor in the beginning and then eventually bought it. I believe still owns it today. So that was sort of more on the scaling side of things. We were at a stage of trying to scale up engineers and a little bit of a challenging environment just because we were far away from the pool of talent, the local pool of talent. And that was kind of before the days of remote. So I think that's one of the other interesting things about my career. I've actually started working remote, I think, much earlier than was common. I think I've been doing remote for 15 years now, maybe.
I think that was necessary when you are residing in Portland.
Yeah, pretty much. Although we've got a few. So then you were right. So in situ, Boeing, and then to BAE Systems, and then Draper Labs. So those two are not startups; those are more.
We're skipping Angle.
You know my history better than I do. That's right.
Well, I somehow somebody twisted your arm to move from Portland to Wellesley, Massachusetts.
That somebody was you. And you know how that turned out. That was we skipped over that. That was actually before In Situ. That was right after the 2008 recession. So I moved to Wellesley just in time for that year, the 2009 year where everything was winding down, and then by the end of that year, that Angle job, that was actually really fun. I liked that. That was basically as a sort of what would you call it, a resident CTO sort of position.
Yeah, I would absolutely call it that. So it was a cool model. I thought I would have done that for many years if it had been possible, but we were, I've always believed that really early stage investing is drastically underserved,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore tons of great things are built in these research institutions, mostly universities, that that sort of stays there. They'll do this great work. They'll maybe even file a patent, which was how we usually found out about them, and then that's it. But what you and I and our team did was we went to the tech transfer officers around the Northeast. We every maybe 6 months we'd go back to the whole group of them one at a time, and we'd see something interesting, and if the inventor was willing to be part of it like a chief scientist, then we'd pull it out. You'd be the CTO for a little while, but I'd maybe be this sort of CEO sort of for the same period of time. The goal was, of course, to get it up on its feet, get some other people to run it, and we move on to the next one. That was the plan.
Yep. Yeah, the transition from research into a real early stage company is really challenging. And that's something that's been a theme sort of over the last 15 years for me. I've been involved in a lot of those different transitions, and they're quite challenging. It's largely people issues, I think. The skill sets that the academics have and the researchers have are very different from the skill sets that are needed. So, kind of having some sort of smooth transition is tricky, and it's a really interesting social engineering problem.
Yeah, like for example, I would talk to these professors at the university. They did this, great work. They even had the foresight to file a patent, and they had made their choice. They were a full professor, let's say. That's the most common rank they'd achieved. And they loved that. But they liked what they'd built, and they thought, well, it'd be nice to see this take off. The best you could do was get them to be a 1 day a week. They all have a day a week available for something outside, and they could be a chief scientist 1 day a week. Once I was able to find somebody that was ready to take their sabbatical, and then they were able to be on this new thing full time for at least that year. But yeah, it's a different mindset and the skill set, like you said.
So then I think we're up to the Dover piece of the story, which again, it's exactly this model, right? This is research that originally came out of academia that was transitioned first through the larger defense contractor BAE, and then Draper Laboratories, and then ultimately we spun that out as Dover Microsystems.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of second point where our paths really crossed in startups. And,
yep.
So that's, I mean, again, it's a great example of transition. I think we did a really good job with transitioning the technology. I think it was, it's, I don't know. Tell me what's your view on sort of the Dover story as far as, I mean, I think the real challenges we had were on the customer acquisition side, weren't they?
I think the trouble for any startup like Dover that's trying to sell hardware and is trying to get into the, into a chip. You need a lot of resources because it takes so long. And there really wasn't an opportunity to fundamentally change the business model in that space. The business model is sort of set. It's a licensing model. They want to license your IP. They want to put it on their chip. They have to get that chip fully designed and debugged, fabricated, and then sold to somebody that's going to actually finally deliver it to market. That's a long time.
Yeah. So I'm curious at this point, how do you feel about hard tech?
Well, see, so I still think hard tech is almost by definition highly differentiated. So if you have something that works, you've got kind of a green field for a while that you can operate in. I'm just not sure that, doing another thing like this where it's, hardware IP without a lot more resources behind it is just a very tough road. And that's why, and we've pivoted to now going after government contracts, because then you have a predictable revenue stream. You're never going to grow. You're never going to see a hockey stick doing that. You're going to see a nice, slow, steady growth, but at least it's predictable, and you understand exactly how much runway you've got at any point in time, and you kind of know when you're going to be able to go after another contract to add more to that. So, that's where we are right now. We pivoted away from the commercial. The plan would be to go back to commercial, So
I think this is national security relevant technology, and so it is something where the government really should be stepping up.
Yeah. Well, so I'm not even sure that the number 6 was correct, because I didn't know that you did one while you were still in diapers. But but because you started really early. But whatever the number is, would you do another? And if so, why or why not? Curious about.
So there's two sides to that. So Absolutely. Startups are just so much fun in terms of being in a small team, having to be really nimble, having to focus a lot on the market. All of those things are great pluses. Um, for me at this stage in my career, the real issue is the risk, the financial risk of the outcome. And so, yeah, if I can go back, knowing what I know now, if I can go back to being 20, I could knock it out of the park. So, you know, that's that's the thing that's unfortunate is like I wish I could take all these mistakes back and give them
Well,
to my younger
you
years.
know, I in the book that is coming out in the near future, and on these kinds of discussions, partly because it's the best way to kind of convey what you've learned to other people is to talk about your mistakes. And I just want to make sure that and you've already just done this. I want to convey, I feel similarly that it is a joyful experience to do a startup. It doesn't have to have a gigantic exit for that to still be true. For Dover, which is 7 years old officially, I guess, plus there was the 2 years prior to that incubating it. Most of those years were very joyful. We really struggled through the pandemic, so that was a tough year. And so there were, those moments weren't all joyful, but overall the experience of every one of my startups was joyful, and only two had decent exits. So, that wasn't a necessary condition. I want to talk a little bit about founders. And there is no formally defined role for founder. There's the original group of people decides who is going to be given that moniker, founder, and then you sort of figure out what the roles are. But what do you think? Uh, if a founders or soon to be founders are listening, what should they think their role should be?
I think there's a variety of roles. So this is an argument for having a diversity of founders, for one. I think it is a really tricky issue, and especially when you look at what's the difference between the founders and then the early employees, because there's so much overlap between those in terms of roles, the level of effort that people are contributing to the outcome, um, how you work out the compensation, those different roles. It's really tricky. I think, I guess as I think back on it, I think the founders have a sort of fundamental stake in the business. You're committed to it, sort of to the end. Basically, it's just when it gets hard, when the money's tight or there's technical problem, whatever the downtimes are, founders don't get to walk away, whereas the employees do. And I think that's a big sort of distinction there. It's like a level of commitment to the long term. Um, that's kind of the distinction I would make. What do you think? Thoughts on that?
So, well, I think there's a bunch of challenges in that early stage. We ended up having six, which is the largest number I've ever had. Six founders at Dover. Prior to that, I had five once, and then I had three and two and one in some of the others. But the problem I saw with having six was that that's a big enough group that you can't just say, "Hey, let's go for a walk and have a chat." When you have two founders, you do that, and no one thinks anything of it. But when you have six, you have to grab a conference room. It's on the calendar. Everyone knows. Everyone's wondering, what are these founders planning now? And it created a caste system that I was uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
That caste system is always there, but you're making the point that it's just much more obvious when you have a herd of founders going into a conference room. Um, yeah.
yeah, and then, but you also brought up another point that bothered me a little bit, which is that so then there's the six, but immediately there was a seven, eight, and nine, and they weren't founders, but they were there within a month, 2 months of when the founders had declared we're the founders. And so, and they were like, well, I'm almost a founder, and and there should have been a title of like sub founder or something. I mean, but I'm being facetious because that would have been ridiculous. But that was always a point of tension, and a couple of those people, right up until the end, were complaining that they weren't founders and wished they had been. Um, okay, so then I guess we almost so we ended up calling everybody either a founder or co-founder, and it was on business cards. It was in their title. It was like it was a title. But I guess everybody was more or less in engineering, except for me. I mean, I was kind of a wannabe engineer sometimes. But what we ought to talk about is, so I'm going to tell a story about what I think is an amazing exemplar of a founder. Okay, and so it's a story about it is a story about Dover. That's not going to be disguised. And we were struggling with sort of learning that there was a major barrier to our product being successful in the market, and that was how big it was. And that matters because you're talking about area on the silicon, area on that substrate is extremely valuable, and the chip companies that are bringing you in and putting you on their chip, they have a budget. Well, we're only going to be able to give away this much to the third parties that bring something to our chip, and if you take up too much room, then you may sort of violate their rule, and they might kick you off. And we were really on the bubble of that happening, and so one of the founders, obviously I'm talking about you, took it upon yourself to do something about that, and you had the insight that, well, wait a minute, we're doing too much in the hardware. We could do a lot more if we could do it ahead of time in the software, which I have this picture. You said a lot of times we were talking to you on the phone and you were walking around your block. I have an image of you creating ruts in the cement all the way around your block, because for week after week you were without any pieces of paper. You were designing the whole thing in your head. You never wrote it down. And then all of a sudden you were ready, and it just popped out into code.
Yep, I remember that. I have a vivid memory of the particular place I was walking when the final kind of the critical piece dropped. And I realized, okay, this algorithm can solve this problem in this way. Yeah. But it was, it's funny. People talk a lot about sort of innovation and inspiration and, oh, it came in a flash. And I don't feel like that at all. I felt like this was something that I noodled on for probably close to a year. And it was just in that sort of that moment that the pieces all came together, and it worked.
So the end result was that the size on the silicon dropped by 87%, and that got us way below the threshold that was, acceptable. Made all the difference in the world. That is a perfect example of what, if I were to describe what would you want the founder to do? You'd want the person to take on the biggest problems that the company is facing overall and solve them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is one of the things that works really well for me personally. And the reason that I really want to be in a startup is, it's just like, I sort of just live it 24 hours a day, and that works for me in terms of, that's the level of kind of engagement I want in the project. And so I think that's kind of an important difference with founders too, is like, it is that it's 24/7. Um, it's not a 9 to 5 job.
I wonder if we dare tell the opposite kind of story. It's a different company, but there's a story we both know about a founder that I guess almost destroyed the company.
Mm-hmm.
It's the exact opposite of the story I just told. And obviously, we're not going to name names, but take a crack at sort of the nature of what happened.
Well, I want to generalize this a little bit. So I want to tell a story that's a bit of a composite of a couple of founders that I've seen. So there's this really hard thing for so right, the company is your baby as a founder. You're completely invested in it, like I was just talking about. And if you're successful, it grows to a point where you need to let go and hand it off to other people, or delegate, even just delegating more responsibility to a growing team. And I think that's one of the challenges that many founders go through, is that letting go of something that they've been holding so tightly for so many years. And I've seen this now with two, maybe even three founders, that when that time came to transition, they didn't do it well. It was certainly not graceful. And there's I guess a tendency I've seen, which is, I'm going to take my marbles and go home, kind of like, if I can't have it all and be in charge of everything, then I don't want it to be successful. And that's a really toxic sort of attitude. And I think the story that you're alluding to is potentially a bit of that, where the technical founder had critical responsibilities in terms of the quality of the product and the technology, and I'm not even sure whether it was directly a malicious act, or whether it was simply an act of omission, or a lack of care. I don't know.
Mm.
But at a critical moment in the process, the technology got dropped, and it was devastating to the company. It was nearly fatal for the company.
Well, I think both of these are really critical lessons for any founder, CEO who's going to put together a team to keep close watch on things, and lean on founders for helping on the critical stuff, and making sure that the marbles and go home stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's
I'm curious. I have a question for you, which is the sort of the matchmaking process for founders. So I guess I have a bias now about who I would partner with as a founder for a company, and I'm curious your thoughts of how do you pick a good co-founder?
Well, I think the best founding teams are 2-person teams, where one is Well, think of them as the CTO and the CEO. There's the person who's going to take the lead on the business side of things. Obviously, this CEO is responsible for everything, but that's not completely true when you're just a very, very small number of people. And the other person is the technical founder, leader. They both have to have the passion and the vision. The CEO has to be the one that is really good at communicating what's the market, what's the problem this market has. We have a solution that is unique and is going to change the world. And the technical founder can then say, roll up the sleeves. Let me tell you how this came about or how this works. And, and they're going to have the equal passion for how does it work. Maybe we've patented this and that and the other thing. And so we're really, ready to go. And they know the market from the engineering perspective. They know, okay, well, it's going to be able to integrate with this and that people in this market use, and and so you have two people that kind of cover the most important things that you have to get right, which is we got to understand what market we're going into. We got to make sure we're on a path that we can achieve product market fit. That was, by the way, we didn't mention that, but that was one of the other really fundamental things, that we were on a path to figure out product market fit at Dover. But the people that we were working with at that lighthouse customer, our main champion, through a reorg, retired early and was gone. And from then on, we were basically screwed. However, we tried finding an alternate lighthouse customer, and that wasn't something that was, coming quickly. Anyway, so I digress. But anyway, so I think two-person teams are I think easiest to work with. They're ideal. You do want to make sure there is that economic component, which is if you have 6 founders, the financial incentive is spread out, diluted, and that's a problem. With 2, it's not. So, yeah, 2, technical and business. But one more thing. I just actually published an article in Forbes about why tech startups need a techie CEO, because you don't want every interaction with partners, prospective partners, customers, or investors to require what I call a 4-legged sales call, where the CTO has to be there with the CEO. So that the early stage CEO needs to be able to not necessarily get way down into the technical weeds. Nobody that I just described wants to even hear that, but they have to be able to explain why it works, how it works that people will believe it, and then still have put it in the context of the vision and the problem. So you still need a techie CEO, but then the engineering person is the deep technical person.
Yeah, I would add on to that too, that I think you need a business savvy CTO as well. There's I think a pitfall that I've seen often as well, which is the tech dominates the startup, and the focus tends to be on building bigger and better and more tech, and not focusing on the customer side of things too. And so that's where you don't want your technical founder getting distracted by shiny objects that they go chasing technically. You want them to be very pragmatic about, no, we're building just the right thing for the market opportunities that we're servicing.
Well, Andrew, you're describing maturity. You're describing experience. It's true. I think I think it is hard for people, really, young people to already understand that. I
Yeah.
mean, and
And I only say that because I've made that mistake times.
yeah,
Get
yeah.
excited about the tech.
Um, okay, so here's another question. I'm still, because we've we've been founders together multiple times. I'm staying somewhat focused on the founder theme.
Mhm.
Okay, so what do you think the role of a founder is who sees uh, a problem way over here in some other part of the company? And I don't mean a the kind of thing I was talking about you solving, which was, oh, here's a fundamental problem with our whole approach to the market. I'm talking about, oh, there's maybe a management problem or an HR problem or something somewhere else in the company. Do you feel like founders should have um, a mandate that they're able to kind of dive into any aspect of the company, or is that too disruptive to the other parts of the company? What is your view on that?
I would say yes to all of those. That's a really uh, tricky issue, and I think it's very specific to the relationship between those founders. So it's a it's a really important issue that you're calling out because right you can in the sense that you were just talking about a techie CEO, right? That's kind of like you want to be able to share the load for various issues that come up that the founders have to deal with. And so that can be done in a very positive way where you're um, sort of able to share those responsibilities. So I can see in some particular situation where, yeah, a founder would sort of go out of their quote swim lane to go take care of another issue. And if it's handled well, then that works. But it could also go the other way. I mean, it's very much like any relationship. It's you're working at cross purposes. And you have to remember in all of these situations, founders are operating under a tremendous amount of stress. So they're not maybe not going over there and intervening in the situation in their best, coming to it from their best uh, mental state, right? They're stressed out. There's a problem. The co-founder's not taking care of it quickly enough. Then they're jumping in, and potentially that could make even more of a mess. So I think, you know, in terms of advice or how would I say, you really have to have a good line of communication with your co-founders and to the degree that it's possible to kind of sketch out some of these responsibilities in advance. I think that's helpful. Um, what do you think?
Yeah, well, it, it's probably helpful if the CEO is one of the founders, and then it may be possible for someone that's one of the other founders who sees something elsewhere in the company that's just not working right to uh, sit down with the CEO founder and say, do you agree? Can you fix this? Because it's really important for our collective success. Um,
And this way
you know,
goes very much to your point about two founders and because you can do that quickly if you have to assemble six people in a conference room to decide if one of them's going to go intervene in some situation, that's just not workable.
well, or are you even going to get all six people to agree that it's a
Yes.
problem, or it's the biggest problem to work on? I mean, that's the other obvious problem with the six. Um, okay, then one other thing that's common is that because founders are leaders, founders are experienced. Usually, founders are usually some of the smartest people around, and um, and they and smart people also tend to have healthy sized egos. So then, look, imagine if you're the CEO of a company and you've got founders that are not getting along. How what advice would you give to that poor CEO?
Bring in a corporate therapist. Start having group therapy outside. and, and I say that in a serious sense that sometimes changing the situation, like doing an offsite or bringing in a different person or consultant to work with people, sometimes can shift the dynamic. You know, again, the fewer people you have, the easier it is to navigate this stuff.
So you're taking a break from startups right now.
Yep.
So you're working at a small defense contractor, and last couple times I've talked to you, you've really been enjoying it. Healthy break from startups, you think?
Yeah, no, it's good. I think we go through different seasons, right? And right now, for me, this is the right place to be. And as you were describing that, the thought that was occurring to me is, there's a lot of these sort of lessons and learnings that apply to teams within larger companies as well. So it's not a clear dichotomy between the founders, the issues around founders and startup. Any team really has. There's all sorts of personality issues and technical issues that they wrestle with. So, so it's good. I'm happy right now. The thing that I actually would like to do, I'd like to be able to agree that people are interested in listening, share some of this learning. I would love to help other people not make some of the mistakes that I've seen.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. I mean, it sort of would be, it would be really fun to either as a external advisor or maybe even a board member to be able to sort of be this sounding board / coach. I met an amazing young woman the other day who's got a cool startup that's focused on sustainable farming. And I had such a good discussion with her that at the end I decided I would invest in her startup. It's just cool stuff.
Yeah.
But these are a lot of these are young people, and they and that's why I wrote the book. It's like, well, can I help someone not make the same mistakes? It's the book I really do wish I'd had when I was going through a lot of these things. Dover was amazing at how many different, really big problems one little company could throw at me.
Yeah. You dealt with a lot of legal stuff that thankfully we didn't have to see too much of on the technical side.
Yeah, well, it was everything. It was, hard to raise money and a big founding team, and market was tough. It was a very challenging startup of all the ones that we've done.
I think one of the thoughts that occurred to me when we were talking about, I don't know, wishing we'd had more information earlier on. That's one thing I think is so different now, is the amount of information that's available to founders. So, and that's a big piece of advice that I would give too, is take 6 months, binge on YouTube, buy a dozen books, just like steep yourself in all of this stuff, because you can learn so much really rapidly, and it's going to just really accelerate your process and help you really miss some of the big potholes. Yeah.
Well, there's a important thing I learned in doing some of the research for the book, and that is that the most important thing by far is figuring out what market you're in, and narrowly defined market. There's a guy named Andy Rachleff who's a founder of Benchmark Capital, and he's a professor at marketing at Stanford. And he's got Rackleff's law, which is that the number one company killer is not getting the market right. And he goes on and he says, great product meets lousy market wins. Great team meets lousy market, and lousy market wins. And great team, great product, great market. Well, we know what happens then.
Yep.
I have my that's bad. Luckily I can edit things out. That when I get a noise, I have like no interruptions turned on, and that wasn't supposed to even come through.
Parked mine in the other room just in case. I'm actually shocked that the cats haven't been like pounding on the door to.
Well, I didn't ever expected Carol to walk in during the podcast, but I'm going to leave that in. I don't, I'm not going to take that out. She was standing there a while. I don't know what she was doing. We're going to, let me stop recording because I'm not going to, but I'll say this. This was fun. I love talking to you. I love talking about founders. This was great.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me on. And, let's do another episode on a different topic.
Let's do that.